Bases-14, Part 6, we bring an update with John Lear, earlier interviewed by Kerry Cassidy at UFO MegaCon. Afterwards, John asked me over for a private meeting in his lair, as he had more things to say.
He doesn't believe a word I say?
Yeah. Well, Kevin Moore doesn't. He interviewed you, didn't he?
Yeah. What doesn't he believe?
Well, I'm assuming he didn't believe any of it.
I think he believed everything, and we talked about Mark
Richards.
What?
Captain Mark Richards.
Captain Mark Richards. We agreed on that. But, yeah, I didn't know he didn't believe anything I said.
No, I'm just assuming he didn't, so I could get you to sort of say things which he didn't get you to say.
No, I never
so
heard
we could have some fun. Well, let's talk about Captain Mark Richards.
Yeah, Mark Richards. You know, he's been in jail for 38 years, and Kevin Moore is going to release some information here in about 3 or 4 weeks. I tried to get him to give me in advance a couple of snippets I could use, but he wouldn't do it. He said I'd have to wait until the whole story could be told.
Yeah.
Now, Kerry Cassidy, bless her heart, you know, at least last time I talked to her, believes every word he says. But, and I haven't talked to Richards myself, but the stories I've heard about him breaking into Dulce with his father are just totally impossible. And Kerry said, well, do you know that he talked with the head Gray of Dulce? And I said, I never heard there was a head Gray at Dulce. And Grays are just cybernetic organisms. They don't run anything. They work at the behest of whoever runs them, whether they're good aliens or bad aliens or intermediate aliens. So based on the fact that Dulce is a mile below the surface of the ground, I can't believe that Mark Richard and his father climbed down there, or however they got down, for this alleged firefight. Now, this alleged war, which Phil Schneider claimed to have participated in, is all BS. And
that's exactly what I want to hear. I want to hear what really happened.
I've told the story many times, as Cherry Hinkle first told me, and she was told by the guard that had escaped from Dulce. And the story was that it was an altercation, it wasn't a war, that a Gray was giving a lecture or information to 44 scientists, U.S. scientists, regarding all kinds of, you know, far advanced technical information. And during the lecture, apparently, one Delta Force officer walked in the room, and he had on a sidearm that was holstered, and he apparently forgot the briefings that they get daily that there is to be no weapon anywhere near a Gray with ammunition in it, whether it's cocked and locked, condition 1, condition 3, whatever, because they will be instantly killed. So when the Delta Force member walked in the room, he was instantly killed by the Gray. So the rest of the Delta Force, seeing this on their monitor from wherever their headquarters was, decided to retaliate. And 21 of them came down, and they were going to subdue or get rid of the Gray, and the Gray killed everybody, not only the 22 Delta Force, but the 44 scientists. And this makes 66 people that were dead, and according to the reports, died of a head wound, and it was no more specific than a head wound. So this story I'd heard like in 1987. And when Bob Lazar worked at S4, he told me among the briefings that he read was the briefing of an altercation in which 66 people were killed. And the briefing he read was just exactly as I just told it to you, except for the fact that it allegedly, at least in this report, happened at Area 51, Groom Lake, not Dulce. But I account for the discrepancy as Bob Lazar's clearance had not reached high enough to include the mention of Dulce, and that's why it's at Area 51. So that was not a war. Phil Schneider was not there. Phil Schneider may have been murdered, but I don't know that for a fact. I do know that he was never at Dulce. Now, Phil Schneider did work on several deep underground projects, but the wounds he shows did not occur at Dulce. I don't know where they occurred, but Phil has been here several times, and we've talked over this issue, and he sticks with his story, and all I can say is it may be true, but I don't believe it, so there you go.
Why is it based on the wounds?
What?
The wounds that you talked about. What sort of wounding did he have?
Wounds on his stomach that were supposedly radiation wounds of some kind of weapon.
As he would be shot by some kind of beam weapon, or?
Supposedly. I can't tell you what color. I'm medium red-green colorblind, and I can't tell colors anyway. So I can't give you any more information than Phil Schneider raised his shirt and said, "I got these at the war on Dulce." Now, some of the stories of the war include people that I knew from when I worked in Laos, flying for the agency. These are names of top Air Force personnel, and there's no possibility that they would have been involved in an attack on Dulce. First of all, they were too old about the time Dulce occurred. They would have been in probably in their 40s in 1973. So when the Dulce allegedly occurred in 1979, they would have been approaching 50, and it's not at this age where you're prime, ready to attack aliens deep underground. So I have a lot of problems with the story, and basically this is my problem with Mark Richards. So it'll be interesting to see what Kevin Moore comes up with. I'm anxious to see it.
I mean, there's no smoke without fire.
Right.
So what do you think really happened?
What really happened?
Yeah.
Just,
I mean, just as you just said. But
yeah, just as I just said. That's what I heard. Now it may be different, but there was no war as such.
Tompkins. Building submarine, using submarine manufacturing technology to build 3-mile-long ships up there during the 40s. And sections being anti-graved up. And then you mentioned the last time that Lear Incorporated, or your father's company, was actually one of the top contractors for anti-gravity technology.
Right.
Was that, in your opinion, or do you know if those sections were anti-graved up using your father's technology?
Well, that contract was let in 1952, so that would have been well after the Tompkins story, which I haven't personally heard myself.
Yeah.
The one story I did hear is I drove up to Idaho. It was a 12-hour drive here from Las Vegas to meet with somebody who was allegedly going to tell me everything I needed to know. And when I got there, he said, well, that was a surprise to him because he wasn't ready to discuss anything that he was involved in. But he did tell me one story, and that was that he was involved in the construction of some moon mining equipment. Not equipment, moon mining, excavation or whatever. And this particular unit was at least 3 or 4 stories high, which would have been, 40 or 50 feet high. And he said to me, John, it was so big that I rented a Cessna 172 and flew around it just to get an idea of how big this thing was. And I said, well, how did they get it to the moon? He said, well, I wasn't involved in that part, so I don't know how they got it to the moon. So I believe this would have been in the 60s.
Right.
So I really don't know or have any really solid information of what we have. If we ever went to the moon, it's with a full partnership with ET, because there's no way we can get through the Van Allen belt by ourselves.
In other words, it can't be in a tin can.
Pardon?
It can't be in a tin can. It's got to be something else.
So, now that we have the Bruce Schwartz videos and see that there's, massive industrialization on the moon, I don't know whether there'd be any room for us or why they would let us mine up there. And, the specific reason for the Van Allen belt was to keep us from going anywhere until we had improved ourselves sociologically, and that means learned how to live with integrity, without envy, hate, or greed, and to express our love to our families each and every day. That's what we're here on Earth to do. And we're not here to explore or mine the moon or explore or mine Mars. So I don't know about those stories. I would hazard a guess that those stories are put out as disinformation for the public to believe that we're a lot more advanced or stronger than we really are. Now, I do know that we have a lot of technology in orbit, and including the 13 direct energy weapons that John Walson has videoed, and the foundries that are used to make the metal parts, D.D, which are used in the new Virginia-class Block II submarines and new aircraft carriers like the Gerald Ford. And
why would they need to make them in space?
Pardon?
Why would they need to make that?
Because the metal has to be made in zero gravity. And in orbit is the only way they could do it, and that's why they made at least 2 foundries in orbit to make these sheets. And what these sheets are is each plate is stronger than steel, lighter than titanium, and with a small electrical charge, they can keep fluid, water, between 5 and 7 centimeters away from the hull. So what this means is, any submarine or aircraft carrier is limited in the speed in water as the equation 1.34 times the square root of the water line, which limits it to, say, 45, 50 knots. But when we keep the fluid or seawater 5 centimeters away, that means there is no drag, which means they can go as fast as the propulsion will let them, and I assume that's over 100 knots, both for submarines and the aircraft carriers. Now I've heard stories of, I've asked the people who've been on these aircraft carriers, how do they keep it quiet? And they said, well, that's no problem. First of all, nobody is allowed on deck while they're doing those speeds. And second of all, when they get somewhere, and the normal question will be, how did we get there so fast? He said, Navy personnel are not going to ask a question of anybody how or what happened, because that's not the way it works. They keep their mouths shut and they do what they, are assigned to do. So the new Virginia class Block II submarines just started coming out last summer, and they have 3 phases of advanced technology, which the Navy didn't bother to tell the public what they were, just that they were very advanced. But the 3 are using the D.D, and the second is that they use fusion instead of fission reactors, which are lighter, more powerful, and allows them to use 2 or 3 in place of, 4 or 5 reactors on board. And the third is the prop jet propulsion that they use to propel the submarines through the water. That's a lot lighter and quieter than what they've been using.
Propellers.
Yeah.
I can understand that the reason why you need to create the crystal structure of that material in space is that if you had a very uniform crystal structure, any fields going through that would be unimpeded and would be virtually superconducting.
They would make it superconducting.
So what kind of field are they using to keep that water out and sustain that pressure?
Don't know. That's above my pay grade right now.
So what does that DDAD, you mentioned that?
D.D?
Yeah.
What's the question?
What is it?
It's a metal. And when I first came out with this story about 2 or 3 years ago, we have an agreement with the UK that we give them everything we invent or come up with, and they give us everything that they can invent or come up with. And somebody came on the web and said that her son had just got back from deployment and said that everything that I said was true, that he had seen it.
Okay. There's something which somebody mentioned to me about the in vitro fertilization in England, was that they were making or modifying in some way or other beings in Britain, in the bases there, for use on the lunar base. So in vitro fertilization, I don't know how old it is, but we must be talking 60s, or I'm sure somebody will have the exact date when it was released to the public, which means that Britain has a lunar base. So that would tie in with what you're saying about what we have, you have.
Yeah. Yes. Now, I had a friend that was worked for Osama bin Laden, who was Osama's half-brother, and Salam was the one that ran the construction operation, the bin Laden construction operation in Saudi Arabia. My friend Cecil McMains worked up at the Groom Lake on the Blackbird program. And when that was effectively shut down in the early or late 60s, early 70s, he did a few jobs around town and then wound up as Osama bin Laden's gopher, his co-pilot, and his get it done cohort. And as that was going on, I lived in Cairo, and I was always over at Salam's apartment, talking with Salam and Cecil. And when I came back to the United States in 1982, Cecil still worked there, and he would work, I think, 3 months on and then 6 weeks off. And he'd come over to the house and talk about, you know, what was going on and stuff. And one of the things he told me is we're sitting at my bar there, and this is 1983. He asked me, what do you know about clones? And I said, nothing. I don't know anything about clones. And he said, well, it's all true. I've seen it. It's deep in Saudi Arabia. It's all underground. And they're making armies. So that's about all he told me. But that was in 1983. So I can't imagine how advanced they are now. We've heard about the Kandahar giant. And
What's that?
the Kandahar giant.
Yeah.
The Kandahar giant is a tactical team was investigating the mountains, certain areas to the east of Kandahar in Afghanistan. They were walking along a very narrow path and came upon a large cave, and there was a giant 15 feet tall. And he says the giant attacked him, took a spear and stabbed one of the teams and held him up like that. And it took them a long time to subdue, actually kill the giant. And they said what was amazing is you'd think something that big would be kind of cumbersome. And he was as light and walking around as a ballet dancer. He had full control. And but anyway, they killed him, and a helicopter was sent in with a net to pick the giant up and take it back to Kandahar, and then it was taken allegedly by C-130 to Frankfurt and then back to the United States. I can only assume that we use that DNA to make our own 15-foot giants. So,
Vietnam. Temples.
pardon?
The temples in Vietnam. The use of clone armies to fight something.
We did, or you're asking me?
We did. You mentioned it on other times that there was some kind of major battle in Vietnam which involved some kind of aliens which came out of a temple.
Oh, they weren't, that wasn't a major battle. That was the fact that we were attempting to get rid of the extraterrestrial creatures that were in Vietnam. They were hiding in forests, in areas not underground, but depressions in the forest. And they were apparently about 7 feet tall. They had wings. And the guys that were there said that they could fly up into the air, but they didn't flap their wings. They just rose whenever they wanted to. And my friend was stationed in Okinawa. He'd be sent whenever they found or suspected that there was an area of these creatures. They'd be sent over to Vietnam to try and capture or subdue or somehow get in contact with these creatures. But as far as he told me, they were never able to get close to him, other than the fact that one of these creatures got close to him and he could feel him on the back of his neck, but he was able to get away and escape. So I've only entertained the fact that that may have been part or all of the reason we went into Vietnam. I still think the major reason was because of the overall influence of the Nazi Zionist alliance in the United States. Wanted to make money, and they do that by selling lots of helicopters. They had taken control of Bell Helicopter at the same time they took control of NASA. And they've all been infiltrated by this Nazi Zionist group that's been operating since the end of World War II in the United States, helped by Operation Paperclip,
Yeah.
which was run by John Foster Dulles, who was Secretary of State, Allen Dulles, his brother, who was head of the CIA, and Eleanor Dulles, their sister, who was head of the Berlin desk, and facilitated the paperclip, which allowed 5,000 or more Nazis into the United States with full citizenship, no questions asked. So,
Have you heard of Michael Shrimpton?
I've heard the name. Who was
in
that?
England? He's written a book about the secret German intelligence.
About what?
He's written a book called Spy Hunter
Yeah,
about the secret German intelligence agency
yeah,
called the DVD. And he explained that Dulles, the joke was they were von Dulles, as in German agents for this secret intelligence agency, not the German intelligence agency, but a secret one. And the paperclip was much, much bigger than anybody ever.
I believe it. You know, the History Channel just ran a 3-part series, Hunting for Hitler, and tremendously good documentation about how Hitler escaped in a large airplane from Berlin, landed in Spain, northeast Spain. They had a monastery. He was there for several months. They had photos of the foundation of the antenna that was used to guide the airplanes coming from Germany. They always had inclement bad weather there, and they needed a reliable way to find this monastery. And they had pictures of the foundation there with Telefunken engraved on it. And then he escaped from Spain in a submarine and went to Tenerife. And they showed all the places, or the place that he was supposedly at Tenerife for several months, and then documented his departure from Tenerife in a submarine to Argentina, and had the place on the coast of Argentina where he allegedly landed, and worked his way to the other side of the country, and I forget the name of the town that was there, but it's my information that Hitler died at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota in 1968, so he was involved with whatever Paperclip was doing, at least from the end of World War II until he died in 1968.
Well, the island that's opposite Tenerife, La Gomera, has a lot of German tourists there. It's a very popular place for German tourists, which is no coincidence. Did you see a photograph of Bush with, not Bush, is it W. Bush, the Bush Senior? Why was he was, there was a photograph with Bush between two comfortable armchairs, and it was cropped, and the ear of the person to one side was that of Adolf Hitler, because it's very distinctive. The ear, you can't, it's like your fingerprints.
Yeah, I find that very possible.
I think Alice gave me that document, Alice Slight, some time ago.
Who was that?
Alice, who sends her regards.
Which Alice?
Alice Slight.
Oh, our Alice?
Our Alice.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Why was Bush the only leading U.S. government figure to be allowed into Area 51? Or was he the only one?
I don't know whether he was allowed into Area 51. He was very high in whatever was going on, so I have no reason to doubt that he was there. And I don't know if he was shown, all the stuff that goes on there. I just wrote a story that I posted yesterday about the Nevada National, it's called the Nevada National Test Site. That's not the exact name, but it's the new name. And they have increased the area of super security from the Area 51 to include the entire test site. And there's the protocol to get in includes facial recognition, the bones in your hand, fingerprints, eyeball recognition, all kinds of stuff, and weight going in and going out. And the new secret base is, I know it by the name of Sandia. I'm sure it's changed since then.
Yeah.
I had some recordings. I set up my scanner here with an antenna on this roof pointed at the test site, and I recorded ground-to-air communications between Nellis Range Control and the airplanes, and it was voice activated. And so I'd turn it on and go to work for a couple of weeks, and when I come back, I'd have a cassette full of these communications. They'd never heard much because everybody talks in code, but one thing they did mention was Station 12, and that it was only a 5-minute flight from Groom Lake. So that was probably at least one name for Sandia. Now, as I posted 6 months ago on my Facebook page, I talk about Sandia was ready for operation in 1987, and they needed 2,000 people to operate it, and they had to get 2,000 people up in the morning and 2,000 people in the evening back. And they couldn't use airplanes because that would tip off that there was something secret going on that needed 2,000 people. So they ended up making a super high-speed subway between the Luxor and the Bellagio and Sandia. And Bellagio was used because it already had underground parking for hundreds of cars, which they were able to use. And all they did was dig a tunnel to the underground terminal at the Bellagio. Now, the reason the terminal was under the Luxor, because the Luxor is just across the street from Special Projects. And Special Projects is the operation that runs the Beech 1900s and the Boeing 737s up to Groom Lake and Tonopah. And they made an underground passageway with a moving sidewalk or whatever that would take the people who are authorized to go to Sandia to get on and go to the underground terminal at Luxor, get on the subway. Then they'd make one stop at the Bellagio to pick up people there, and then I think it was a 21-minute trip to Sandia. And that operated 24/7 and has been operating.
That's pretty fast.
They've been operating, 87, late 80s until now. One interesting thing is, in 2004, they were enlarging the terminal under the Bellagio, and they accidentally hit the main power grid for the power in Bellagio and knocked out the power for 3 days. Now, this is a disaster because we all know that to build a casino, one of the first things you do is make the power uninterruptible, because there's hundreds of thousands of dollars going across the table every minute, every hour, and you cannot lose track of that. And in this case, it knocked the total power out for 3 days. So it created a huge intelligence problem, because now, in order to fix this grid, they had to tell Nevada Power and get their help. And of course, Nevada Power didn't know anything about it, and they had to be briefed on it and signed. They had to sign NDAs, the non-disclosure agreement,
Yeah.
and get that thing going. Now, if you type in on the web today, Bellagio Power Out 2004, it has, 40 or 50 stories about this, but each one has, the cause is indeterminate, was never determined what the cause
Indeterminate.
was.
The taxi driver was mentioning it had been delayed and things. Is that anything to do with those sort of constructions which they've been using for other
No,
purposes?
the football stadium's not delayed. What he's talking about is down the street, Resorts World bought the fake casino Echelon. Now, Echelon was a fake casino built by the Boyd Gaming Group to hide the operation of where they started to build the underground subway. And it's on the strip where the Stardust used to be, and when the Stardust was raised, when it was demolished, it left about 73 acres of just vacant land, and they used that land to start building the subway. Now, when you build a subway, you start on the top. You can't start underground, so you have to have a large area for the tunnels to take all this equipment down and work on. And so they got this area that was on the strip to use to build the subway. And in order to hide this equipment from Las Vegas Boulevard, they built a fake casino, which they called the Echelon, and built the framework so that it hid all the construction going on from those people driving up and down Las Vegas Boulevard. So the people that worked on the fake casino were told that not to look into what was going on in that vacant area because they had hired CIA sharpshooters with high-powered rifles that would kill them instantly if they even peeked over the side. And so I never did get to the bottom of why OSHA didn't complain about that, but they got away with it. Now, all that was wrapped up in, I assume, the middle 90s, and that fake casinos sat vacant for many years until 2 or 3 years ago when it was purchased by Resorts World. And Resorts World was going to use the framework to build their casino. They were going to use the fake Echelon framework to build their casino. And we're not sure whether Boyd Gaming told them that since it was going to be a fake casino, they didn't build it to code. So when Resorts World started into construction and found out that this was not to code, it was delayed 1.5 years while they figured out how to bring everything up to code to make their casino viable. And they're building that now. We're finishing it up right now. I guess it's going to be in operation next year or so. But
I've heard of layers in Area 51 which go down like they're a mile in diameter, each layer, and they're making some kind of creatures there based on a recipe given to cloned mothers who then breed these things, which then eat their way out of the mother and then eat the mother as their first meal. And a lot of these things are horrendous, pretty nasty.
I haven't heard about that. I do know that the underground areas was built by the Seabees in the late 40s after World War II because
who are the Seabees?
The Navy Seabees, they're the construction, hot shot construction. And at that time, Groom Lake was used as a Navy training field, and in some of the photos of Groom Lake, I can show you where the old field was because it's still the cross runways there. And
Is that what you got into?
where they built, what?
You got into Groom Lake when
Pardon?
you took that beautiful picture.
Yeah.
Well, it's a beautiful picture.
The Seabees built that, those underground, I think the first ones were maybe 5 or 6 levels underground. But they built it, now remember this is in the late 40s, right underneath where Tony Lear and Fish Salmon, the 2 test pilots that were originally sent by Kelly Johnson to find a place where they could test the U-2. And they picked Groom Lake, and the spot where they picked was just coincidentally directly over these underground hangars that the Seabees had built in the 40s.
Now,
And-
John,
What?
John, we know there's no such thing as a coincidence in this business.
Absolutely, there is no such thing as coincidence or accident. It's all planned.
So tell us the real story about that.
Well, which
Those
part?
underground levels in World War II, they must have been involved with the big ships that they were sending up, those 3-mile long things. So what's going on there?
Absolutely. You
And
know,
the
I
Nazis
don't, all
must have
I'm
been
telling you
working
is
on
what
it.
I know for sure. Now, speculate all you want, but
Excuse me.
what the point of the story was that in 1993, I had a friend who was flying the F-117A, which was still secret at that time, and they were using Groom Lake as an area for their training, landing, and taking off. And he told me that the main runway had caved in to these underground hangars, and they had to use only a small portion of the Groom Lake runway until they could build a new one. And the new one was built several hundred feet to the east, and that's where the runway is today. But the other runway, the one that caved in, is not used. And they rebuilt the runway and apparently the underground stuff, but the whole test site is now underground hangars, the whole thing. The Tonopah Test Range, there's a round dry lake just to the east of the runways at the Tonopah Test Range, and we've always known that right in the center was a round area that was actually an elevator that would take the saucers up from the hangars up to the ground, and that's where the girl, what was her name, Nyala, the girl that worked at Tonopah Test Range and got the shot in her neck and all that.
Oh, I don't know about
went to
that.
the moon. Anyway,
Hey, tell me that story.
well, I heard it many years ago, but it just surfaced lately, and I'm trying to remember her name. But she was in the Air Force, transferred to Tonopah Test Range, and at one point she was taken at night up to the surface, and she saw, and this is like in the,
You're talking Niara Isley.
yeah,
Okay. She was at Area 52, or what they know. Or
Pardon?
she was at the oh, I can't remember. I think they call it Area
Yeah.
52 now.
now it's called Area 52, but it's actually the Tonopah Test Range.
Yeah.
And I don't know why they called it Area 52, maybe just to change the name. Because Area 51 was named because it was in a grid that used the number 51, but it wouldn't transfer to 52. So what they used Area 52 for was they used we had one of every MiG produced or any fighter produced in Russia based there. And what would they do is they'd fly these MiGs like the 19, the 21, the 23, the 25, all armed with different, whether they had rockets or air-to-air or air-to-ground or heat-seeking, whatever, different munitions on the
That's Russian.
airplane. What?
That's
Yeah,
Russian munitions.
Russian.
Yeah, yeah.
And they would fly it through a radar range and measure the radar signature. And then what they did, and this is all in the late 60s, early 70s, what they did is transfer that radar signature to the radar inside our fighter jets. And instead of a blip coming up of a foreign fighter jet, the actual airplane designation would come up with the armament that it had.
Right.
That gave us a pretty good advantage. And that's what they used that area for. So,
is that what Niara was used? She was used with to test some kind of radar effectability on how it would see things at that area.
right.
And how it would respond to testing the saucers when they move really rapidly. Is that the same sort of testing that they were using for those MiGs?
Probably. Now, all of that technology that was at S4, where Bob worked, was transferred 3 years ago down to Woomera in South Central Australia. And the reason they picked Woomera is because it was a former test site for all of Australia's nuclear weapons tests. And they already had underground facilities, huge underground facilities that they could use. They were tired of people watching from the black mailbox up at the test site what they were doing. So they moved it all down there. And just by accident, I had a friend who lived there and keeps me up to date.
Just by accident, you had a friend.
And he gives me the update on what they're doing there. But in 1975, Kelly Johnson, who was the head of the Skunk Works, retired and put his fair-haired boy, Ben Rich, in charge. And Ben Rich took over the Skunk Works. And Ben Rich was born to a very wealthy Jewish family in the Philippines in the, let's see, it would have been 53, 43, 1925, I think is when he was born. When he was college age, they sent him to the University of California at Berkeley and I think at Santa Barbara, and he got his engineering degree, and in 1953, they got him a job at Lockheed. And he was so knowledgeable and such a great engineer, they decided to upgrade him to the Skunk Works. But to have a top secret clearance, like at the Skunk Works, you had to have been born in the United States. There's no way about it, no congressional approval, no way to get around it. You had to have been born in the United States.
It doesn't stop you from being president.
What?
It doesn't stop you from being president.
That's correct. And so the with the tremendous influence of the dual passport American-Israeli contingents all throughout the United States, they were able to pony up a background for Ben Rich so that he could get a top secret clearance. And his phony name was Ben Dover, Bendover.
Now, John, I don't know what you're referring to there.
And that was an inside joke against American intelligence for having given him a top secret clearance. But when he took over the Skunk Works, the F-117A was being designed and developed. Okay, so we were talking about Ben Rich and getting his security clearance.
Yeah.
And when he took over, the Skunk Works was in the process of designing and building the F-117A, a Air Force stealth fighter. And the general in charge was General Bobby Bonds, General Robert Bonds. And in 78 or 79, all this information I'm giving you is in Ben Rich's book. It's right there at the Skunk Works. General Bobby Bonds was up in Ben Rich's office and noticed on a door there was a lock specific only to the Navy, U.S. Navy. And he knew that because he had worked at the Pentagon and knew familiar with all different kinds of locks. And
that kind of detail can be very important.
And he asked Ben what was in there, and Ben said he couldn't tell him. And of course, General Bonds, being a general and head of the 117A program, and which he thought was the only program going on in the Skunk Works, he was a little bit put out and said that he would be willing to take a crash axe and go in without, Ben Rich's help. Well, Ben Rich gave him a bunch of papers to sign, NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, let him in there, and he discovered the design and development of the F-19, which was a stealth fighter much superior to the F-117A, and used the same engine, the same landing gear, a lot of same equipment, but much more stealth oriented, kind of a bat wing. I have some pictures on my wall there of a model of it in my hallway there. But General Bonds then realized there was another airplane being built. And of course he was sworn to secrecy. And when the 117A and the F-19 started testing at Groom Lake, starting in 1982, 83, 84, they invited General Bonds to fly the F-19, which he was happy to do. And they got him all strapped in. He took off from Groom Lake and flew to the south. There's a mountain just before you get to the border of Highway 95 there, called Little Skull Mountain. And as he started his turn back to Groom Lake, they electronically locked the controls on the F-19 and put him into a dive where he went in at 450 knots in the mountain. And
there wouldn't be much left of him.
Killed him instantly. And there's a little plaque there in honor of General Bobby Bonds, and they say killed flying a MiG-23. Their cover story was he was flying a MiG-23, but it was obviously, it was still the F-19, which was an Israeli developed and designed jet, or designed by the Skunk Works for the Israelis, and 64 of which were delivered to Israel at U.S. taxpayers' expense. And this led me to find out that Ben Rich was the highest ranking Mossad spy west of the Mississippi. Head of the Skunk Works.
See, I mean, that's a heck of a lot to silence somebody. I mean, could he not have just...
What, to kill him?
Yeah, I mean, why not?
Well, you have to understand that they couldn't possibly let anybody find out that we had designed and delivered 64 stealth fighters, which were far more advanced than the F-117A, to Israel, especially when the U.S. taxpayer paid for it. They can't take the chance of anybody finding that out. And, of course, General Bonds was the only one that knew about it at that point. That wasn't Israeli.
Yeah. So what does that mean if the Israelis, you mentioned Zionist Nazi connections,
right.
What's the Israeli Nazi Zionist plot? What are they doing? Because that was one of the things about Area 51.
They already did it. They control the United States, lock, stock, and barrel.
De facto after Project Paperclip.
They what?
In other words, that's what Project Paperclip was, the takeover of the United States.
Right. And they were very successful at it. Nobody knows it yet, but in fact, that's the way it's true. Nobody would believe it.
Which is, in 1935, the British Empire was dissolved and basically handed over to the United States Empire.
Yeah.
Are you aware of that?
Yep.
So, secret space program, they must be controlling that as well.
Oh, absolutely. That's, the U.S. Space Command U.S. Navy Space Command is located in Kwajalein in the South Pacific, and has been there for 40 years. And
Sorry, I
when
didn't
the
quite pick that up. Where?
Kwajalein Island in the South Pacific.
Oh, right, okay.
When President Trump announced his space program a year or so ago, all of us were wondering, does he know about the space program? Is he trying to set it up where he'll dovetail his space program into their space program? I doubt it. I don't think he knows their space program.
Are you familiar with Dark Journalist and his work?
Who?
DJ, the Dark Journalist.
No.
Trump's father had some kind of connection with Bush Senior.
Mm-hmm.
So that would mean that there could be a backdoor knowledge that Trump is fully aware of that.
Yeah. So.
And if the British have got a base on the moon,
The what?
if the British have a presence on the moon, and they're making some kind of cybernetic grey version, whatever, where are these 3-mile long massive craft with weapons and attack craft? Who are they fighting against?
I don't know, and I don't know if they exist. I, haven't seen any evidence myself of them.
Isn't that what John Wolson is seeing?
Is what?
Is that not what John Wolson is seeing?
No,
Craft
his are
that we built.
Yeah, there's some
huge
there's
platforms.
nothing that's 3 miles long though.
Well, a mile long.
Pardon?
A mile?
Maybe.
It certainly isn't running on chemical rockets.
But if that's what John Wolson is photographing, then it proves my theory that we don't have anything that goes into outer space. All our secret stuff is limited to a low Earth orbit.
1,000 miles or whatever.
Less than that. 500 is where the Van Allen belt starts. Now, there was a post yesterday that said that Bob Lazar said the Van Allen belt would not kill an astronaut. And I pointed out that Bob Lazar has never been in the Van Allen belt with a Geiger counter, so he would have to rely on whatever NASA told him was the radio active flux of the Van Allen belt. Now,
Which they don't have any record of from Apollo.
the what?
They don't have any record of those official records of that radiation from the Apollo missions.
Yeah,
Which
Apollo mission ever went anywhere
Which is why they don't have a record of it.
other than low Earth orbit. And the reason is because they never could get the Saturn V to work. Now, Nexus...
Now, I'm a big fan of the Saturn V. I can understand that the thrust of the first stage engines was inadequate because of cavitation. And there's been some recently released material on one of the space... There's a couple of guys on YouTube who do some pretty good stuff on space. They're now saying that all the pictures we see of the Saturn V have the raw engine, but what they actually used was some kind of coating, of some kind of thermal coating, which was stuck on, and you never saw that when it took off because it took off so fast. That would make the engines work better or something like that.
Pure, unadulterated bullshit.
Now,
Bullshit. Bullshit. Now, there is no possible way that a Saturn V was ever launched, no matter whether they had,
but we saw the thing going
coating on it or not. What you saw and what was launched for the public were Saturn IVBs dressed up to look like Saturn Vs. Now, a book was released...
Saturn IV S4 is that size, Saturn V's that size.
A book was released 2 weeks ago.
I'm going to nail you on this, John. I don't believe you.
A book was released 2 weeks ago about exactly why the Saturn V was never launched or never worked. It's very detailed. I've got one on order. It hasn't arrived yet. The same story that this book tells is the same story that Nexus magazine in Australia published 5 years ago. And there's a scientist there that wrote a very detailed story on why the Saturn V could never work and did never work. And I read it then, and I wrote to Rhodes, I forget what his first name is.
Duncan Rhodes, I think.
Duncan. I
And
emailed him the other day.
The editor of the Nexus magazine in England talks about this, and his name escapes me right now.
I emailed Duncan. I didn't hear back. I asked for a copy of the story that they published 5 years ago, and told him about this book, but I haven't got my copy yet. But anybody who thinks that Saturn V was a viable operation is just not conversant with the facts.
So,
and that means you.
No, listen, I have a model of the Saturn V, so I must have launched. Now, what I'd like to know, John, is right now, the United States has said they're going back to the moon with whatever they've got can get hold of.
They went?
They're going back to the moon in 2 years' time, or by 2024.
Now, qualify that going back. They never went in the first place.
Listen, I have to go by
no possibility.
I believe every word that comes out of the United States NASA. Because they're good, honest, decent people, and God damn it, they're using taxpayers' money, so they must be honest.
That's the money they used to build the U.S. Navy Space Command, because they never went to the moon. They only launched 1 or 2 Mercuries, only launched 1 or 2 Geminis, and all that money they siphoned off of those programs was used to build the U.S. Navy Space Command. That's where they got the money.
What about Elon Musk? What about SpaceX?
Is that Elon Musk's deal?
Yeah.
Well, good luck. You know,
that's all. This is the future of the American space project. We got to fly the flag here, John. We're flying the flag because the United States is going back into space. We've had to rely on the Ruskies for too long.
Total bullshit. Now, I know you want to know all about the Boeing 737 MAX 8, so what I've done is I pulled up on the web right in front of me, Boeing 737 MAX 8 update, March 31st, 2019.
Abel Danger, do you talk to him?
You know, he's a nice guy, but if he just quit spelling every third word, it'd be a lot easier to listen to his stuff. Now, he has come up with some interesting information.
I just left him 10 days ago in Wales.
God darn it. If he just wouldn't spell every third word, it'd be a lot easier to listen to what he has to say.
Oh, that's deep sarcasm there.
But he's the one that came up with the fact that Lufthansa was the only airline that bought the 777 and made Boeing pull out the second autopilot. Now, the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot is what's causing these crashes.
Yes.
And it could be 2 reasons. Either there's a glitch, or my favorite one is the Israelis have hacked it, and there's somebody on board that they don't like, so they make the airplane crash. Who cares if they kill an extra 200 people? In the case of MS-370, they killed, let's see, about 237, 250, I think close to 250 people to get 5 Chinese engineers. And those 5 Chinese engineers co-held the very valuable patent with Jacob Rothschild. And what happened is they took over command of 370, flew at Diego Garcia, refueled it, flew it to Tel Aviv, outfitted the Boeing.
But they bumped off all the passengers.
Yeah, in the air. In Tel Aviv, they modified it so that a fighter flying alongside it could operate the controls of the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot just like they could from the ground.
Yeah.
So then they took off from Tel Aviv, and this is 3 weeks after they hijacked it from Kuala Lumpur, took off, and they intercepted the route of the fictitious MS-17 flying from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur. They intercepted that route, and then when they got to the Ukraine, they turned slightly left, flew it into the middle of the Zionist-controlled area of Ukraine, and then the two jets guiding it shot it down. And so when it crashed,
there was talk they shot the pilots who weren't there. There was talk they shot into the pilot's cabin to shoot them.
yeah, there was nobody in there. But then they blamed it on the Russians, which had nothing to do with it and didn't know, really what was going on. But the first doctors on the scene said, "What's going on here? These passengers have been dead for 3 weeks." So the patent went to Jacobs Rothschild, and a few months later, my friend Mike Green, who flew with me at Coletta, was flying Jacob in a helicopter, and they had a mid-air, which killed Jacob, and we think that that was all White Dragon, and that Eric Rothschild is next. But the patent then went to the Carlyle Group, who has it now.
Is that the Carlyle Group, as in Carlyle Trucking up in...
As in David Rubenstein, Carlyle.
Yeah,
Carlyle.
okay. That's a lot of complicated ways of doing it. Was your friend killed as well?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So what's the purpose of that? What's the ultimate purpose of to doing
The
that?
purpose of that was the fact that the control of the patent was so valuable, in the hundreds of billions of dollars, and we don't know exactly what it is yet.
Is it some kind of electronics or something in satellites? Is
Yeah,
it
something.
Some kind of
I don't know yet.
Yeah.
I've seen several things come up on the web proposing what it is, but I haven't seen yet what it really is. But whatever it is, it's worth hundreds of billions of dollars, and it was worth killing the 250 people or so that were killed in the MS 370.
I've heard that they put a couple of extra bodies in there from some other assassination attempt to get rid of them. Just fill it out.
They're very clever at doing stuff like that, and so, like I say, in the Max 8, the Lion Air out of Indonesia, if it had just been one accident, it could have been a glitch. But as I explained,
Is it because they had to put these new engines in, which were much further forward, so that the center of gravity of the plane isn't...
Total, unadulterated bullshit. Because an airplane has to balance before it's takeoff. And there's a sheet of paper, and everything is already computed. The airplane has to balance. I've heard that same argument by some moron that posts sends me posts. His name is Akak, and he had this one moron give the 12 reasons or 15 reasons why the Max 8 crashed, and one of them was that the engines were forward. It was just pure bullshit. People that don't know what they're talking about. When I've been in the industry for 43 years, I know how weight and balance works. I know how it's computed, and there's no possible way that the engines forward could make it do anything. Now, what they're using as a cover, now, when they built, in 1980, when they started building the Boeing 757, that's when they decided to put in an extra autopilot, a second autopilot, called the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot, to take over the airplane in case a hijacker was hijacking the airplane. And that way, they could take full control of the airplane and fly it to wherever they wanted. And the way they did that is because every control prior to that, if it's a yaw damper, it's an autopilot, uses actuators that use a control force of 80 pounds, which means that if it somehow malfunctions, the pilot can overpower it. Now, two of the Boeing crashes, United 585 in Colorado Springs and North U.S. Air 427 in Pittsburgh were pilot suicides. But the FAA is so adamant about not telling the public that the captain committed suicide that they came up with phony reasons why the crash happened. And what they used was a runaway yaw damper. And they had Boeing completely redesign the yaw damper system, which is total bullshit because you can overcome any of that stuff with 80 pounds of force, which is a lot of force, but not beyond any pilot capability. But what they did when they designed the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot was make 150 pounds force so that there's no way the pilot could take over. So that if there was a glitch, like in Lion Air and Ethiopian Air, if there was a glitch, there's no way the pilot could overcome because it's got a 150-pound force, and even with two pilots, they're not going to overcome it. So that's plausible that it could be a glitch. But I'm leaning more towards Israel using it to get rid of people they don't particularly like and use the MAX 8 as a reason. Now, the president of Boeing out of Chicago a couple of weeks ago released a statement that we've almost finished the redesign of the MAX 8 to put it back into service. Now, almost is not a word that's used in aviation. You don't almost get level at flight level 350.
Yeah, but
You're not almost at Mach 8.2. You don't almost get cleared for an approach. It's just not used. So for the president of Boeing to say we've almost got the fix for the MAX 8 is just totally ridiculous. And just, I've called this up now. It's March 31st. We're waiting to find out if it's almost fixed, which it isn't. Now, Boeing has...
But this is costing them millions. I mean, all their planes are...
Right. And therein lies the problem, because they either have to deactivate every single Boeing uninterruptible autopilot, or they have to prove that the Israelis did it. It's hilarious.
But this is a lot of money. I mean, this is big deal.
It says Southwest removes Boeing 737 MAX 8 from flight schedule. Holy shit, how many airplanes is that? Oh, 34. Boy, that's expensive.
Yes.
Now, the Boeing president told us 2 weeks ago they had almost fixed it. So...
That's a little bit like almost exactly nearly. But
almost
I'm almost
exactly
sure.
what?
It's almost exactly nearly sure.
Oh, me, oh, what?
Which is a precision description of... But this is killing people. There's a lot of stuff. I want to get back to this, who really is running the secret space program.
You want to go back where?
Well, this NASA stuff and Saturn V's and things. I mean, how the hell are they going to dress up? I mean, a lot of people now are very suspicious of what they send up into space. How are they going to con people a second time when nobody really believes them?
How are they going to con them to going to the moon?
No, a second time. I mean, you can run a joke once. You can't run the same joke twice.
That's correct. They aren't going to the moon. Or if they are, it's only under the auspices of ET. But there's so many things going on the moon. Where are they going to put them? I mean, it's not like there's space. Oh, we'll give them the 40 acres over there by Copernicus.
Yes. The talk about the Chinese this year disclosing about ET. Obviously, the Chinese have landed something on the moon, and obviously, the Israelis have just landed something on the moon. And obviously, that's all real, and you can believe every word of it.
I posted last week why neither one of those could be true, and I showed the phony pictures of the Chang 4 on the far side and why it was phony, and that we could prove that that same identical picture was posted 4 years ago. Now, it was posted 4 years ago. Did that mean they went 4 years away? The Chinese, all they used is old lunar orbiter photos that NASA gave them. That's all they use. The Israelis, the only photos they use are the ones they steal from NASA.
John, this is shocking. I'm in a state of complete shock that this kind of thing would happen.
And you should, very well should be, because
Yes.
anybody that believes that the Saturn V flew really should check into a counseling operation and say, you know, I believe the Saturn V actually flew. Can you help me? And see if they can do anything. You know, I wouldn't know where to start. I've been watching the house videos of the medical doctor that could solve any problem. I think that he would take your case because he always liked cases that were insolvable, that nobody else could solve. And I think if you told him what your problem was, that you believed in the Saturn V.
Well, I've seen this on the internet. It must be true. But where are we going to have all this fun with Elon Musk and his stainless steel nose cone and taking 100 people to Mars and things? I mean, let's have some fun.
Now wait, who wanted to take the 1 trillion people to outer space? That was Bezos, wasn't it? Jeff Bezos?
Well, I don't know.
The head of Amazon?
Oh, yes.
He wanted to take 1 trillion people. And so I told him, I wrote an open letter to him a couple of weeks ago, posted on my page, and I said, "Dear Jeff, you moron, there's already 30 trillion people out in our solar system. I mean, there's 40 planets there, apparently 31 that you don't know of, because NASA's only told you about 9.
Well, maybe 10.
And every one of
they
those...
can't make a decision on 10 or 9.
It's what?
They can't make a decision properly. 1 minute is 10, 1 minute is 10.
So every one of those 40 planets has a civilization, different civilization, and every one of those planets has different moons with different civilizations. So there's, trillions upon trillions of people in outer space. What are they going to do with your trillion? Do you
He hasn't got one launched, one proper. He hasn't got into orbit or anything yet.
He went?
He hasn't even got this thing into orbit.
Well, I'm glad you came on this morning because I haven't had a laugh like this in a while.
It's good fun, John.
Let me light this thing.
I think it's wonderful you've got a pipe. I haven't seen somebody use a pipe for a long time. Anything new in your pictures?
What picture? On the walls?
Yeah,
Well, the only one I put up since you've been here is the one of is the poster of the moon pictures that I got from Bruce Schwartz, and that's over there.
What's the Schwartz stuff?
Schwartz, a couple of years ago, heard me talk about people on the moon, and he wanted to find out for himself whether or not I was full of bullshit. And he bought a 14-inch telescope, and it was very, very powerful. Like that one, that's 8 inches, and his was, almost twice as big as that.
Is that the one that John Wolfson fixed?
That went on, he fixed it.
Yeah.
And he started looking around, and the first thing he realized that the moon is covered by a hologram. We're not seeing what's actually there. In other words, when we look up and we see, alleged craters and alleged mares, that's not what's there. And so he figured out a way to penetrate the hologram, and those pictures on that poster, particularly towards the top, were the industrialized areas that have hundreds of buildings and roadways and bridges and, all kinds of stuff up there. Too bad you couldn't have hung yourself.
I'll get a taxi in a couple of minutes. So is this section?
Yeah, no. What? Square what? Those are buildings. Those are buildings. Huge buildings. So if you go to Bruce Sees All on YouTube, you'll see all that stuff. If it hasn't been removed, because YouTube now is removing any offensive material that NASA doesn't want on there.
But I'm actually no. How are we going to? I mean, with Elon Musk, he's NASA's great. Well, he's doing business. How are they going to maintain this farce? Did you enjoy the UFO conference?
You know, it was very tiring for me. And,
Yes, I mean it was. Yeah.
I couldn't stay any longer than Tuesday afternoon because I was just, tired all the time.
Something was going on there. I was very tired. On the headphones in my room, there's a lot of electronic interference. In fact, one of the people I was talking to then, I went to. She wanted to show me some pictures, and when I was using the camera, I could hear this buzz.
Mm.
So I know my hotel room was being bugged because I put some laundry in the bath just to sort of wash it, and there was a drip, a plop from the faucet. Now nobody could have heard that drip, drip. You can't see it unless they had the room bugged.
Mm.
And the TV was a bit fuzzy. And I was doing one interview with somebody, and we had 7 interruptions. We had 5 people who came to change the room over. And then another interruption came when this guy came in, a plumber came in to fix the faucet. There's no way that he would have known there was a dripping faucet unless they heard it on the bug at night, drip, drip, drip. So I reckon that was them telling me that we've got the place bugged, and what are you going to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
But they don't need to bug the room. All they got to do is watch everything on YouTube, because I publish everything on YouTube. Tell us the history of the... I've been recording that all the time, bloody hell. John, what about the secrets of the universe in 20 minutes?
Well, first of all, I want to tell you that there was no Big Bang. And the universe is not 19 billion light years old.
It's not. Maybe it's 20.
It's infinite. There was no beginning and there was no end. And this is so hard for humans to grasp that God didn't create anything. There is no God. Get over it.
John, you told
Get over it. Just get over it.
John, you told me before there is no God. There's a great pumpkin. But how
The universe has been going on forever. There was never any beginning. There's not going to be any end. And there's no expanding. It's all the same here. Our universe is just like the infinite number of other universes that exist, along with the infinite number of dimensions in each universe that exists. It's so big, I still can't find a word to tell people how big it is. And they say, well, God and his son Jesus, and that's where I ring off, because there's just no getting around it, E.T. uses the same story. There's a billion other Earths like this one. It's kind of a prison. We're here to learn how to live with integrity, without envy, hate, or greed, and to express our love, learn to express our love to our families each and every day. That there's a billion planets that have the same program. And each of those planets is called Earth. They each, have different starting dates. They all use the same story: the virgin birth, the star in the east, the 3 wise men, the guy that Jesus, the Son of God, and he walks on water. They all use the same story, because they've developed this over billions of years, and it works every run. But all of that is allegorical. It never happened. It's a good way for people to start off to believe in something, to believe in, other than the god of fire and the god of volcanoes, all the different gods. They had to have one god, and so they made it, the god, and everybody's believed in that. But when you get as you get older and more knowledgeable, you realize, there is no God like that. It's just a force, a karmic force in the universe, that the universe evens everything out. So don't fuck up. If you take revenge on somebody, you're going to get it back 10 times worse.
Well, that's happening to a few things now.
What?
It's happening to a few individuals now.
Absolutely.
What about Gridkeeper when they visited here?
Yeah.
They were going to this disclosure thing.
We were going to what?
We were going to do disclosure.
Oh, we are?
How do you feel that's going to work, disclosure?
I just wrote on my Facebook page about disclosure, and I said I've often asked about disclosure, when it's going to happen, and I always have the same answer. Never. Never, ever.
I agree with you.
And the reason is because E.T. doesn't want people to know what's going on. They're supposed to be here learning how to live with integrity without envy or greed, and they don't want anybody to know that it's them that's trying to get them to live to those standards.
I'm very enthralled.
And so there's not going to be a disclosure. And I tell the story of a good friend saying, John, look, I think I'm ready. I want to know the truth. I don't care whether you tell anybody else, what's going on, but I really, want to know the real story. And I say, well, do you think you're ready? Oh, yes, I'm ready.
Yeah, I'm ready.
So
we've got 5 minutes probably now.
Yeah, I start in
history of the world.
I start in telling them, and about 3 or 4 minutes later, the guy says, hold, wait just a second, John. You're telling me there's no God, that Jesus was a myth, that Mary Magdalene was allegorical, that the Son of God was just a story? That's the biggest bunch of bullshit I've ever heard in my life.
Well, I know that. I come from Northern Ireland. For crying out loud.
If that's disclosure, I don't want to hear about it. Okay, now at the bottom is Las Vegas, and all those little blue dots are where the different subways go to. And the one that goes to the very top, that secret base is 44 miles south of Wendover, Utah, and that's where the black triangles fly out of.
That's up here?
Yeah. Now that
TR3s?
That TR3 is in. It's an old thing. I don't. That thing's got to be what, 30 years old?
Yeah.
So those are the only ones I know about, and there's lots more. The other day there was a video on Discovery, I think it was, about all of the construction that had been going on at the West Wing at the White House, and that it went 60 feet deep, and nobody knew what it was for. And then they had these experts saying, well, it's to protect the White House against a 74 kiloton or megaton bomb, and all of that was just pure nonsense. What it was for is they were attaching the West Wing to the underground subways that go all around the United States, and they were finally hooking up the White House. Now, it wasn't specifically for the president, because the president of the United States doesn't have high enough clearance to know about the underground transportation system. But there are certain people that visit the White House on occasion who are authorized to know.
If somebody explained who authorizes, who classifies the classification system for the president?
The monarchy. The monarchy that runs the Nevada test site.
Yeah.
And everything else. They're completely separate from the United States of America. They don't abide by our Constitution, our laws, or regulations. They have their own laws, constitution, regulations. It's a monarchy. There's a king of the test site, and they're the ones that run everything. And they're actually the Nazi-Zionist alliance.
How can you have Nazis and Zionists together? Zionists are not Jewish. What are they?
You know, that was the genius of what's going on. Because in the middle of World War II, the Jews and Nazis decided to align, but they had to make people think that there was no alliance because they didn't want people to know they were joining up. So that's when they invented the 6 million Jews that Hitler burned or gassed. You know, it was all bullshit. It never happened. There may have been 870,000, but they're the same Poles, same Hungarians, same other people that were killed in War II, not just specifically the Israelis or the Jewish people.
Do you know anything about this DVD, the Secret German Intelligence Agency, which...
No, you just what you told me about it.
Yeah. That's Michael Shrimpton's work. And other people, a couple of other people have sussed on that.
I'm just going to tell you something.
Is it exciting, John?
It was
fun?
About what you were saying. Oh, the Nazi Zionists. The alliance. So what they had to do was cook up this long-standing hatred between Jews and Germans, and cook up this 6 million Jews, which Elie Weisberg, or whatever his name was, complained about for 30 years. Oh, the humanity, you know, and all that bullshit. It was just bullshit. It was to protect the secrecy of the Nazi-Zionist alliance, which runs everything now.
Well, surely they're the bad guys then. I mean, what can we do about that?
Nothing. Nothing. It's all over. Deal with it.
John. I don't want to hear that.
I'm 76. What have I got? 2 years, 3 years to go? I don't care.
John, you're good fun. And thank you very much. That means when you smile, you're going to light up the whole room. Well, thanks, John.
Okay, my pleasure.
All the best. It's good fun. Okay.
My day isn't complete until I've ruined somebody else's.
Well, thank you.